You hungry? Because today's latest trouble in Russia is food related. Yep, pick up the phone, because it is time for the latest edition of the Geopolitics Helpline. Harvest season begins now in Russia's southern regions, like Krasnodar Krai, just east of Crimea. What happens if diesel shortages, rural manpower shortages, and rail and river transport problems combine to make for a very bad harvest? I would describe this as a significant problem. It would not be on the top of my mind if I were Vladimir Putin or Victor Kevin from Massachusetts, but it would be on the list of things that I need to review with my close advisors on a daily basis. And discussing the problem on the helpline is great because it connects a whole bunch of things in the world together. Things you probably would be able to think through yourself if given some time. Clearly, the first thing our minds jump to is a parallel problem with the Ukrainian refinery campaign. It is not just average Alexanders facing problems here. Farmer Fedors are also struggling with fuel shortages, as the question indicates. That said, the harvest problem is not nearly as acute as the oil issues. The way that each manifests itself is unique. Attacking refineries has primarily created a fiscal problem for the Kremlin as it crafts its federal budget, with annoyed Russians currently the secondary concern. That will not be the case for a weak harvest. Instead, the real pain will be felt by the individual farmers who cannot turn a profit. Insofar as this creates headaches for the Kremlin, it will be due to that constituency politically mobilizing. There is also a separate set of problems that the rest of the world will encounter. But let me start inside of Russia and the logistical challenges that farmers are starting to face. When wheat is ready to harvest, you only get about a week to do it. If that window closes, then all of the labor and capital that went into the planting and growing is essentially lit on fire. Consequently, farmers are sensitive to supply shocks. The standard way this gets sorted out, with the market eventually reallocating supply where there is unfulfilled demand, is not good enough to save the crops. Eventually does not cut it. But to compound the problem, Russia has begun rationing diesel. Rationing is virtually never a good idea as compared to letting price signals dictate where goods ought to go. Case in point here. The quotas available to farmers are not sufficient to harvest their entire fields. A farmer willing to pay twice as much for a liter of diesel as an average Alexander is cannot do so, even though the farmer's return on that investment would be substantial as compared to whatever value the other consumer might enjoy. I think it is worth underscoring the extent of Russia's problem here. Previously, we have seen similar export restrictions on diesel during the larger October and November harvest seasons. The fact that I am writing this in July and the market manipulations are already here suggests that the end of fall might be a real bloodbath. Then there are a couple of other question marks that are not receiving as widespread attention, but I think that they are worth speculating about now in case we see them bite later. As you know, Ukraine has gone after logistics in the southern half of the occupied regions. Part of this means striking every truck that drone operators can locate. Russia has seemingly responded by using any truck, no matter its original purpose, to try to resupply the region. This could spill over to farmers needing trucks to ship their harvest to awaiting harbors, both in the form of brutal supply shocks and also with generally elevated prices after the market tries to stabilize. It is worth noting here that you need to move the grain within a few weeks of harvest. Although it is not as time sensitive as the initial harvest, there is still a ticking bomb to deal with. The other question mark worth flagging is the status of export terminals. Ukraine has actively gone after oil export terminals as a part of that larger campaign. Well, agricultural terminals still need regular maintenance, and the crews who provide that service can also go toward repairing oil terminals. Right now, the Kremlin is prioritizing the latter, meaning that there may also be a pinch with the former. Moving past the farmer's perspective, Russian citizens are at no risk of going hungry here. Russia exports such massive quantities of grain that you could cut farmers' output in half and still keep everyone fed. This is also not an issue for Kremlin finances, as I said at the top, because state-owned and state-licensed enterprises are not exporting the goods. Instead, this is mostly a question of export revenues for the farmers, who, like anyone else, would like to make a bit of money. If they cannot as a consequence of the war, they may start to raise a political fuss in Moscow. That is where this turns into a pressure point for the Kremlin. Still, the bigger effects will be felt globally. Perhaps you remember the corresponding warnings at the beginning of the Iran war. Everyone was focused on what was happening with oil prices and elevated pain at the pump. But what were the Hormuz export experts warning everyone about? It was fertilizer. Hormuz only constrains a fifth of the seaborne oil trade. By contrast, it is a third of the seaborne fertilizer trade. Again, this is a timing issue. If the fertilizer is not there during the planting season, there is no undoing the problem later. As a result, prices for wheat are already up about 30%. We have also talked about price elasticity of gasoline, where a short-run decrease in supply, even by a small margin, results in a large increase in price because consumers cannot quickly modify their behavior. Well, it is substantially worse for food. There is very little modification possible for the quantity that you eat. We all need around 2,000 to 3,000 calories per day, and the only real options here are for farmers to switch to more calorie-intensive crops that require less fertilizer when we run into a problem like this one. The first-order problems will be felt in poor countries that rely on food imports. This will primarily be in the Middle East and Africa. The rest of the world might notice the problem in the form of higher food prices, but this will just get lumped into an inflation calculation. It will hardly prevent richer areas of the world from eating. It is the poor ones who cannot afford a market price that end up suffering. However, there is a second-order problem that Western countries, particularly in Europe, will encounter. When there is domestic political instability in the areas that I just mentioned, what tends to happen is a surge in immigration to Europe. But think about the political ramifications. Incumbent parties tend to take a beating, and the parties that tend to benefit are primarily Ukraine skeptics. So, in the short run, we may see problems for the Kremlin, but in the long run, we may see problems for Kyiv. That is why sanctions on Russian fertilizers have been lax. This is not a gift to Russia. This is not just to ensure political stability at home and continued support to Ukraine. It is also to make sure that everyone eats, and we will have to see where that goes over the next few months. Meanwhile, do I have another few months of the Geopolitics Helpline in me? I don't know, but my streak of daily content across 2 channels just passed 5 full months. Click here to check out the Geopolitics Helpline archive. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care.